Imagine walking through a narrow crack in the earth, a passage so tight that sunlight barely reaches the ground, the walls rising hundreds of feet on either side of you, twisting and turning for over a kilometer, and you have absolutely no idea what waits for you at the end. And then, suddenly, through a sliver of light, you catch your first glimpse of a facade carved directly into solid rock, rising nearly 40 meters into the sky, glowing pink and gold in the desert sun. And in that single moment you understand that you are standing in front of something that should not exist, something that defies everything you thought you knew about what ancient people were capable of building, because this is Petra, and what you are looking at is only the beginning of a mystery that swallowed an entire civilization whole, buried it for over 1,000 years, and hid it so completely that when a Swiss explorer finally found it again in 1812, the local people who lived just miles away had no idea it was even there. So how does an entire city, home to tens of thousands of people, carved into the bones of the earth itself, simply vanish from human memory? And more importantly, who are the people brilliant enough to build it in the first place? Because the answer to that question begins not with kings or emperors, but with nomads, wandering traders from the Arabian desert known as the Nabateans, a people with no written history of their own that survives today, who around the 6th century BCE began moving through the harsh, unforgiving landscape of what is now southern Jordan, controlling the trade routes that carried frankincense, myrrh, spices, and silk between Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean world. And these were not primitive wanderers stumbling through the desert by luck. They were master strategists who understood something almost no one else did. They knew where every hidden water source existed across hundreds of miles of arid wasteland, and they guarded that knowledge like a weapon, because in the desert, water is not just survival, it is power, and whoever controls the water controls everyone who needs to cross that land alive. And this is exactly how the Nabateans built their fortune, by charging tolls, providing safe passage, and controlling the flow of the most valuable goods in the ancient world, until they accumulated so much wealth that they needed a capital worthy of it, and they found the perfect location in a hidden valley surrounded by towering sandstone mountains, a place so naturally fortified that enemies would need to march through a narrow gorge just to reach it, a place the Nabateans called Rakmu, but the world would eventually come to know it as Petra, meaning rock. And what they built there over the following centuries would become one of the most astonishing feats of engineering and artistry the ancient world had ever seen, because the Nabateans did not simply build structures on top of the rock, they carved directly into it, sculpting entire buildings, tombs, temples, and monuments out of solid sandstone cliffs, using nothing but hand tools, chisels, and an almost superhuman understanding of geometry and structural engineering. And the most breathtaking of all these creations is the structure you see the moment you emerge from that narrow passage known as the Sikh, a monument called Al-Khazneh, or the Treasury, a name given centuries later by local Bedouins who believed that pharaohs had hidden their gold inside a stone urn carved at the very top of the facade, and you can still see bullet marks scarring that urn today, left by generations of treasure hunters who fired at it hoping the gold would spill out. But the truth about the treasury is even more remarkable than any legend, because this building was never a treasury at all. It was actually a tomb, believed to be the final resting place of a Nabatean king, most likely King Aretas IV, who ruled during Petra's golden age around the time of Christ. And to build something like this, the Nabatean architects and workers had to start at the top of the cliff face and carve their way downward, which meant there was no room for error, no way to fix a mistake once the rock was removed. Every single measurement, every column, every detail of the intricate Greek-influenced facade with its Corinthian capitals had to be planned with absolute precision before a single chisel touched the stone. And this technique of carving from top to bottom across an entire city of monuments is part of what made Petra so structurally sound that it has survived for over 2,000 years. But the architecture alone does not explain how tens of thousands of people managed to survive and thrive in the middle of one of the most brutal deserts on the planet. And this is where the true genius of the Nabateans reveals itself, because they solved a problem that had defeated civilizations for centuries. How do you bring life to a place with almost no natural water? And the answer they engineered was a water management system so advanced that modern hydraulic engineers still study it today, because the Nabateans built an intricate network of channels, cisterns, dams, and terracotta pipes carved directly into the rock, capturing every drop of rainfall and flash floodwater that came through the surrounding mountains, storing it in massive underground reservoirs, and distributing it throughout the entire city with a level of precision that allowed Petra to support a population some historians estimate at over 20,000 people. In the middle of a desert that received only a few inches of rainfall each year, and this water system did not just keep people alive, it transformed Petra into a lush, thriving oasis with gardens, pools, and fountains, a literal paradise carved into the harshest environment imaginable, and word of this hidden city of wealth and wonder spread far and wide, drawing merchants, travelers, and eventually the attention of the most powerful empire on earth. because as Petra grew richer and more influential, controlling trade routes that stretched from India to Rome, the Roman Empire began to take notice, and for a while, the Nabateans managed to maintain a delicate independence, acting as valuable trading partners and buffer states rather than enemies to be conquered. But in 106 CE, everything changed when the Roman Emperor Trajan formally annexed the Nabatean kingdom, absorbing it into the Roman province of Arabia Petra. And remarkably, Petra did not fall into ruin under Roman rule. In many ways it flourished even further, with the Romans adding their own architectural touches, a colonnaded street, a large theatre carved into the rock capable of seating thousands of spectators, bathhouses, and expanded infrastructure, blending Roman engineering with Nabatean rock-cutting mastery into something entirely unique. But even the greatest civilizations eventually face forces they cannot control, and for Petra, that force came not from an invading army, but from the earth itself. Because in 363 CE, a massive earthquake struck the region, devastating much of the city, destroying critical sections of the water management system that Petra had depended on for centuries. And while the city attempted to recover, the damage went far deeper than collapsed buildings, because that same earthquake, along with shifting trade routes as sea trade became more dominant than the overland caravan routes Petra had built its entire economy around, began a slow, quiet strangulation of the city's lifeblood. And then in 551 CE, a second devastating earthquake struck, and this time, Petra could not recover. The population dwindled dramatically. The once bustling streets fell silent, and slowly, gradually, over the following centuries, the city that had once controlled the wealth of the ancient world was abandoned almost entirely, left to the shifting sands and the rare Bedouin tribes who continued to live among its ruins, using the ancient tombs as shelter for their families and livestock. And here is where Petra's story takes its most fascinating turn, because unlike other lost cities that were slowly forgotten over centuries as knowledge faded, Petra essentially disappeared from Western knowledge almost entirely for over 1,000 years, hidden not because it was buried underground like Pompeii, but because it was hidden behind mountains, protected by a maze of narrow canyons. Known only to the local Bedouin tribes who called the surrounding region home and who, for generations, deliberately kept its location secret from outsiders, protecting what they considered their own sacred and ancestral territory. And it would take the arrival of one extraordinarily brave and resourceful young explorer to bring Petra back into the world's consciousness, a Swiss traveller and scholar named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, who in 1812 had spent years studying Arabic language, culture, and Islamic customs so thoroughly that he was able to disguise himself as a Muslim scholar travelling under the name Sheikh Ibrahim ibn Abdallah, and Burckhardt had heard local rumours and whispers about ancient ruins hidden somewhere in the mountains near Wadi Musa, but he knew that if he asked too directly or revealed too much curiosity, the local guides would grow suspicious of his true intentions, so he devised a brilliant cover story, telling his Bedouin guide that he wished to make a sacrificial offering at the nearby tomb of Aaron, the brother of Moses, which was believed to be located in the mountains beyond, and only by using this religious pretext could Burckhardt convince a local guide to lead him through the very passage that had hidden Petra from Western eyes for centuries. And as he walked through that same narrow sick that thousands of visitors walk through today, forced to hide his astonishment, forced to maintain his disguise even as he laid eyes on monuments so magnificent they seemed impossible, Burckhardt understood that he was witnessing something the Western world had completely forgotten existed, and he had to document everything he saw through careful, secretive notes, without revealing to his guide the true extent of his amazement, because a foreigner expressing too much interest in ancient treasures could easily be seen as a threat or a grave robber. And it was this single act of daring, intelligent exploration that reintroduced Petra to the modern world, sparking a wave of fascination that has never truly faded, drawing explorers, archaeologists, and eventually millions of tourists from every corner of the globe, all of them walking through that same narrow canyon, experiencing that same breathtaking reveal that Burckhardt experienced over 2 centuries ago. And today Petra stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, officially recognized as one of the new 7 wonders of the world. But even with all of modern archaeology's tools, ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, and decades of careful excavation, historians and archaeologists estimate that as much as 85% of Petra remains completely unexcavated, buried beneath centuries of sand and sediment, which means that everything we have seen so far, every stunning facade, every carved tomb, every hidden temple, might only be a small fraction of what the Nabateans actually built in this hidden valley. And it raises a question that should send chills down your spine. What else is still buried beneath the sand? What other secrets, what other engineering marvels, what other stories of a civilization that mastered the desert are still waiting down there in the dark, hidden just beneath our feet, waiting for someone brave enough, patient enough, and curious enough to dig just a little bit deeper?